Campbell Literature Prize, el CLP Firecracker Award, el Waiting Award y el C.Y. Twombly Award, otorgado por el Foundation for Contemporary Arts. Desde 2011 es profesora en el Kansas City Art Institute. Su libro, Desmorir, fue reconocido en 2020 con el Premio Pulitzer en la categoría de no ficción. Pablo Duarte es editor, traductor, ilustrador y ensayista. Parte de su trabajo de escritura está recopilado en las antologías Lo Infraordinario, de Gris Tormenta, Breve Historia de Ya Mérito, de Sexto Piso, y Arbitraria de Ediciones Antiguas. Ha colaborado con algunos de los medios más representativos del panorama cultural contemporáneo, como son Letras Libres y la Revista de la Universidad de México. Y fue uno de los coordinadores de la emblemática colección Versus de Tumbona Ediciones. Es el autor de Iligible y el editor de Un Gesto del Tiempo. A continuación, cedo la palabra a nuestros invitados.
Pues muchas gracias a todos por venir. Creo que no se necesita, pero bueno. La conversación va a ser en inglés. Creo que les pasaron audífonos, pues, para que sea todo pues, como más natural. Y bueno,
sí,
nada más.
No tiene sonido, ¿verdad?
A ver ahí, ya más o menos.
No.
Aquí este no, pero creo que más bien eso. Ya. Ok, bueno, les decía que muchas gracias a todos por venir. La presentación va a ser en inglés para que la conversación fluya de manera más natural. Y bueno, básicamente eso. Quiero empezar pues con una breve introducción en español quizá, para agradecer a la Feria del Libro de Monterrey pues por ser la anfitriona y por haberle dado un espacio a este libro en el que tuve el privilegio de participar, pero del que Mauricio Sánchez y Jacobo Zanella, los editores de Gris Tormenta, fueron realmente los editores reales de este libro, ¿no? Y agradecerle también a Anne for being here and for taking the time to talk about the book. And well, I would like to start by saying it's a great honor, and it was a great honor to have your texts here in the book, because this book it's a strange book to start with. It's a book. It's not a very easily explainable book when you're trying to explain to someone, oh yes, we have a new anthology, and the new anthology is about. And it's not that easy to talk about this anthology in particular. And it's not that easy because of the initial premise of the anthology, or because of the idea of the anthology to begin. Jacobo, Zanella, and Mauricio, they sent me Catherine Yusuf's essay, which is the prologue of the book. It's a really marvelous essay, and the three of us, we were really taken with the essay. We were really surprised by it, and we wanted to do something with it, but we didn't know exactly what. And through conversations and time and rereadings and meetings and all that, we came up with the idea behind this anthology, which is, let's think about writing, about escritura in Spanish, about the concept of writing, and ask writers we admire to think about writing in terms of the ideas Catherine Yusuf puts in place in her essay. We reached out to many authors, but we also read a lot. And one of the books we read was a handbook for disappointed fate by Anne Boyer. And we were really amazed and surprised, and we wanted to include not just the text we include, but a lot of them. So we had to choose, And eventually we came up with the proposal for the essay, the parts of the essays we included. And so the idea behind the anthology is writing and its gestures, writing and its politics, writing and its poetics, writing and its possibilities, and writing and its impossibilities, and a lot more. And the essays approach writing from very different vantage points. Taking advantage that Anne is here with us, I would like to start by talking about your texts. I would like to ask, because your texts were not originally thought for the anthology, I wanted to ask if you could tell us or share with us what was the original context of the essays. No?
Absolutely. So both texts came from the book, which in the United States is a Handbook of Disappointed Fate, which really, it was a collection of work that had been invited. So the kind of work that we write when, somebody's putting on a little, like evening event, and they want everyone to talk about something involved with poetry. Sometimes conferences, sometimes small magazines, projects my friends would be involved with. They would invite me to do things, and I would write it for them. And much of my life has actually just been taken up with this kind of like the kind you do with your friends, for your friends, for small things. I always felt, though, that I felt very sorry for my friends because they would invite me to write things, and then I would write like these absolutely mad things for them. Right? So they think that I was going to give a conference paper on poetics after the crisis, historical materialism conference, and then I wrote questions for poets. Right, or I think that the difficult ways to publish poetry, which you also include, that was at the most banal creative writing conference, the Association of Writers and Writing Programs, the AWP, and there was a session on strategies of excess and the avant-garde. And so rather than giving any of my thoughts about strategies of excess or the avant-garde, I devised a bunch of insidious modes in which a person might publish poetry. So the whole book is a book of my misbehaviors in the literary sense. And some of them I didn't even bother to publish because I missed the mark so much. So I was thinking like there's like a little fable in here that another academic journal had asked for, and I was too embarrassed because all I could get was a fable. Some of them actually were, even in this book, were actually rejected by people who, having solicited work from me without understanding who I was, were completely appalled at how I fulfilled the prompts. And so that's how the works came to be. One out of a Marxist conference, Historical Materialism, which is in New York and London, at least each year, in which we were trying to decide about poetry after the financial crisis, and the other was my disobedience in the face of the avant-garde.
It ties in with the idea of the book really well, because I think both your texts are some of the most political or politically engaged. One through really taking on political questions, the questions for poets, and the other one in a politically humorous way, no? Like using humor to create subversion and all that. I wanted to ask if you could share your opinions or your ideas of the political, the potential of subversion in writing, or the potential for making political marks, political gestures, in this day and age.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things that we have to consider. One is we all know the insufferable, self-righteous political mode that betrays both literature and the social horizon, right? Like we know when it's bad, and it's bad everywhere, and it has been, it's perpetually bad. That is, its badness renews itself each new crisis and each new struggle, and I tend to think that when political writing fails, it fails in account of like making a claim to virtue, because literature cannot make a claim to virtue. It wouldn't be very interesting if it were virtuous, as people wiser than I have pointed out, like Simone Weil, right? That goodness is like the virtuous kind of goodness, is not a particularly interesting aesthetic quality. On the other hand, there's also something contemptible about art that denies that it exists in a social and political world. Mm-hmm. So I have my commitment, right, and always have, to the world for everyone in it, or a kind of communism, or a kind, like a mode of freedom. And I've always felt this instinct as keenly as I have any kind of aesthetic impulse. Now the question always came, who do I look to as I learned to be a writer, as I learned to be a person in the world? And I've gone back to Genet. Okay. Right, so Prisoner of Love and Thieves' Journal. And it's like the people that, I mean, even the political work that contains within it like a broad sense of what it truly means to be human. That is, the messed up and obscured, the criminal, the truly subversive, the outcast. The literature that preserves that does not get, that does not become full of its own virtue is what is appealing. But when you see those gestures, so that if you look at someone like Genet and Prisoner of Love or Thieves' Journal, the way that this exercises itself in literature is never that straightforward, right? Like, Genet never gets up and he says, you should be nicer to the poor and downtrodden. Like, shame on all of you, right? Like, instead, it's like sexy and dirty and wild and unexpected and excessive and formally innovative. And so this is this fire that I think I found at the very beginning of my reading life that I never abandoned, which is like, what is the difference here between the work that's accountable to the world in a true way and the one that just uses like a pretend, like a fake accountability for one's own brand or self-interest? So I like look to the criminals and the thieves and for that.
And also, in a way, there's a sort of, not criminality, but transgression in form. Mm-hmm. You were talking about how this is a book of your transgressions in that sense. And this is also, the essays collected here, your essays collected here, are really formally innovative too, in a way that normally the original story, or the origin story of the essays, when people asked for something, they were expecting a form, a really traditional form, a form that has history, that has weight. And what you did was subvert that and give whatever you wanted.
Yeah, I mean, they wanted to know what I thought, right? And instead I wanted to give them what I could make, right? And this question, so this book is really remarkable. And I was reading through it today. Some of it was originally written in English, and then some of it I had to struggle through. But it was completely worth doing so, because this is the thing that struck me. It was not immediately obvious to me what you were doing. And so I had this kind of path of mystery as I began to put the book together as a reader to see. Mm-hmm. And so the book too has this kind of like open-endedness, or even sort of formal adventure that you find in the work itself. So like the work that you've chosen all has something unsettled about it, right? And then the path that you put the essays on in the book is off. Like you would not, if you have not read it, Like you will not be able to predict what comes next.
Well, formally, I think Mauricio and Jacobo would agree. Form is a thing. It's a thing very keen to my heart and to the ideas I'm trying to work with. And when the opportunity came to read stuff and propose an index for this, form was a really important part of the proposal. So it's really encouraging to hear the origin story of the essays because, as you said, in a way, thought takes the form thought takes. No, academic papers or editorial pages, they tend to standardize thought. No, they tend to, and in doing so, like stifle a little bit the way thought expresses itself. So that's why I think the questions for poets, the section on questions for poets, is so unsettling in the best way possible. No, and I wanted to ask about the way you unsettle yourself through form in your work.
Well, I mean, this questions for poet is a 5,000 word essay in only questions, and I did not invent that. I mean, there's Brecht's questions for the worker who reads, and then there's actually like subsequent imitations of that, and I felt as if I was partaking in a pretty like a solid like form, at least like a solid minor form, whatever, like you just find on the floor somewhere and you pick it up and you're like, yeah, there's got to have to this. And so that one, it came out of what were really questions, what my friends and I were constantly talking about, because I had some friends, mainly from the visual arts, and they're just like, oh, like the poet. They had just discovered poets. So this was maybe like 2012, this was after Occupy, and everyone in the United States had discovered poets. During this first, I thought, oh my God, this is so exciting. Who are these people, the poets? And they're now in our lives. And oh God, this is like poetry is so vital. And they all wanted to be around us. And they would make big claims for poetry. And we, the poets, on the other hand, especially the poets with with a strong criticality, like we'd been disappointed in poetry for a very long time. We had learned every mode of disappointment with the life of a poet and the art of poetry and the claims it makes. So we were like, how do we break it to our new friends who've decided that we are the revolutionary subjects, right? That we too participate in disappointing art forms, and art forms that have been recuperated. That are often aggressively positioned in society in ways we don't like. And so those questions were all those questions, right, that had come out of this new political and social intersection of that year. And so it seemed very natural because I was so unsettled for the promises that had been made for poetry. Well, obviously I had devoted my life to poetry and literary art forms in a way that was not easy. That was not it wasn't what my parents wanted for me. It wasn't growing up in Salina, Kansas, what anyone wanted for a daughter of the town, right? Being a poet was not part of our career counseling. And so I made great sacrifices to be this thing about which I had so many questions. I suspect I will never answer the questions in the book, right? I suspect that these questions, now if I were to write, it would be different.
Yeah.
That they would take a different form. But I think I think this is a long story to get to the point, which is the fundamental nature of being a poet for me is in the making of forms. That is, poetry exceeds the visible boundaries of poetry. And in fact, when you climb to the ladder and you take a step and there is no wrong, and what you write, the form you're writing in, has never been there before. That's how you know you're writing poetry, right? That it always exceeds itself. and how it exceeds itself is not in the intensity of its feeling, although you need that too, not in the virtuosity of your language, but in the formal imagination. That is, it creates new forms for new thoughts, right? And it is always reaching toward that end, which is, for those of you, I know there's some of you who are poets back here, that is like when you scare yourself and you say, I've made a thing I've never seen before, or no one will know this is a poem, no one will know what it is I've done, then this is probably when you're onto something.
That's really powerful, and I think that's really powerful in terms of poetry, and that's really powerful in terms of the wider idea of writing itself. And I also find it really encouraging because there is, we were talking before we came here about, I don't know, the state of publishing and literature, of publishing right now. And there is something really powerful in the possibility of continuing to create those experiences of form and experiences of, you said like the formal imagination, that are not subjected to what's convenient for the market, or what sells, or what even what the public is expecting. No, the public is expecting, or the readers, or the mass readers are expecting something else. No?
Yeah, or even the prize givers and the critics, the high-end literary establishment. Like often, what will please them is what they've seen before, just done really well and polished up, right? And which always means, when you do start winning prizes, you say, what have I done wrong, right? Like, this is a mess up. But like even yourself, I mean, that's the thing that I was just going to say, is that you might, it's Gertrude Stein, who is one of my great influences, who said, make it ugly, right? That is, because what Ezra Pound said, make it new, and Gertrude Stein said, make it ugly, which is a great sort of queer solution to modernism too, right? Like you could divide the whole history of the modernist project along these two lines, and that is like that shock to yourself is so kind of extraordinary. And it is a lot too, I think like we think about like social processes, when the world changes, the changes might seem terribly upsetting, right? They might seem ugly or hard or difficult. And it might only be later, as time and history shake itself out, that what seemed like an upset to the course of things, to our instincts, became these kind of like socially profound moments of change. It's one of the things that sort of I found so remarkable about this book, and that I really love, is that there's like this absolute faith in some kind of posterity or future. So time in it. So, and I appreciate this because I feel like I'm always fighting this battle. I like really long time. I guess I grew up reading Walt Whitman with these like geologic expanses of time, right? Like I want my time to like be like, I want it to be God's time. Like I want it to be whatever was like the emptiness before God. Like I like this version of thinking about time, and part of what defines the contemporary is that everyone has given up on like every time that they can't see on the face of the clock, right? And they've certainly given up history. And the future is just a depressing thought that they try to repress. But this book does none of this. So tell me about that. Like, what were your thoughts about time itself as you put this together?
Well, one, it's really interesting that you talk about time, because one of the key ideas or the key moments in Yusuf's essay, and one of the things I think most struck both Mauricio and Jacobo and me when we read it, was the idea of time and the idea of taking time from the earliest idea of time, which could, in use of terms, is the cave paintings in Lescaut and the cave paintings we have been finding throughout history. This moment when man, woman, whoever was in there painted something with some intention, or made a gesture with some intention of, we don't know if communicational or just expressive or political or whatever, but there's a gesture in time, no? And that is taken to the extreme of then thinking about, Yusuf start thinking about that, and then she thinks about extermination camps, no? The moment where time seems to stop, or the idea of the future seems to stop, no? Where humanity as a concept or as a thought or as a practice comes to an end, no? Any genocidal situation would be that. And she says, okay, that happens, but, and it's so funny, but there's a quote. I'm gonna read it in Spanish because it's in Spanish, but it says, al unirse un escritor y un lector de dibujos, un seguidor de líneas en cuevas paleolíticas, una solidaridad da paso a una conexión política que trasciende las derivas continentales y los desplazamientos temporales. Los actos privados de solidaridad con el futuro potencian el presente político. So that was really, really moving, because that moment of union between two people, as she writes, is a moment of possibility, no? And when we thought about the book, we thought writing, the act of writing, is like the longing of one person for another person, no? So that we were, well, at least that was my thought when we were reading these texts and thinking about writing with not with a cynical idea or with a cynical view, but with a hopeful view, no?
Yeah, I mean, this writing is the act of longing. I mean, it is also, I mean, I think it's also related politically, and this, I'm just going to say a question I have that I don't have an answer to. Sorry, I do this, but no, I mean, because I've been thinking about this a lot, because, you know, I think like many people, you know, I've been subject to this intense despair about the world, and especially about the multiple wars and the genocide, and the sense that, you know, so many people who would do anything to stop the condition of really sort of like cruel and diabolical industrialized violence that is contemporary war, would do anything to stop the annihilation of our fellow species, you know, of all the other animals, right? Everything that is happening, and the feeling that our old methods don't work, the way that this can easily turn itself into a hatred for our own species, which I mean, I don't know, and I hope it hasn't happened to you, but these thoughts sometimes when you look at war and you look at ecocide, like the thought of like the present moment being a kind of irrefutable verdict. Doris Lessing, in one of her books, puts the youth of the world put humanity on trial. In the Shikasta, in one of her sci-fi books, and the youth of the world gathered together and put humanity on trial. And that sense, right, of the pain of the world, wanting to like prosecute it, right? I think for a lot of people can be like a desire to prosecute even the future generations, right? So even the future, like, so that path that we had, like the desire that we had, or I sure had it. You know, I always like wanted to be a writer because I was such a reader, and like reading saved my life as a child, and I was like, oh, and then someday I'll write a book, and then some girl will go to a used bookstore and she'll pull this strange object off the shelf, and then this will save her life, and then she'll, you have this sort of fantasy of the continuation of like the life-giving force of literature, of like the autonomy and self-definition that no matter what social situation you're in, like this is like, oh, I got a secret power, I can read, right? And so, I have that, but in the despair, the political despair of the present, it can undermine that faith.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I'm just raising the question because I know I'm not alone in sometimes feeling that despair, like the book I'm trying to finish. Part of the reason it's taken so long is like this feeling of my faith in the future and other people being encroached upon by the present's events. And so I think there's a line in it, I'm writing this for the angels and the animals. That is, like, I had to imagine the non-human for a moment to begin to finish. So I don't know, that's why the faith here is so beautiful. That part that you read is part of what I pulled out for myself too in this, right? Because it so beautifully spoke of this kind of pact with the future. This is why I love, like the writers who write poems to like when I'm dead and you're holding my book. Like I'm a sucker for these poems. Like any poet who ever like wrote, you 200 years in the future, I'm here for you and you're holding me now. Like I always loved it. And so I guess I just, what do you think?
No, I'm totally find those gestures really captivating. And I think writing, once we are really conscious of the terrible situations around us, being ecocide or genocide or whatever, we tend, the possibility of movement becomes really restricted between two limits, no? The limit of the one you were talking about, like prosecuting ourselves and like self-hatred, and the other kind of naive optimism for a possible future or for a possible future community. And thinking about the future community, I was reminded of one of the essays in the book by Francisco Serratos, who took Maurice Blanchot's ideas. He has the ideas of particular ideas about community, about the future community, about the impossibility of being in common, and the possibility in the end of doing so. He writes after the Second World War and all the things they knew or they discovered once the war was over. But for us, that idea of the impossible community, like a longing for a community that cannot materialize, but that even if it doesn't materialize, the longing itself can carry us through, I think, or can give us hope to change things or to move things around or to place ourselves in different places regarding others. I think that those two limits are present in a way in the essence of the book, I think.
They are indeed, and that Blanchot is like, again, you sort of the book follows it through. This book is just the way that it's arranged is like deeply pleasing formally, because you get to see the various streams like moving through the landscape of thought in it, and it's Frederick Jameson, the literary critic, died. I guess it's been a week.
Yeah.
And his provocation to all of us was that like the true form of resistance was to like keep utopia alive, right? And so that this a kind of ardent, stubborn, militant attachment to the impossible was absolutely necessary as we like moved into the stage of history we were in. And he didn't do that. He was not generally naive. I guess sometimes he was, but no, he was not generally naive. That is, he had a pretty secure grasp on the difficulty of even understanding the present, right? Like he had understood that the fragmentation, like, things fragment. Like part of the nature of the world that we live in is that it's always occluded. We have no certainty. Things are mystified, hidden from us. We think we know, and then we shift into, then we realize, oh, I didn't know anything then, and then the next day you're still doing the same thing. So he wasn't naive about that. But this book has this like, I should have thought of what words I could use for it. It's a utopian gesture to me, right? But one that is sort of strangely broad across time. And so also the Guy Davenport essay on the archaic and the sort of movement of the archaic into the modern, right? Like, this is a bit unusual for a thing which I think generally has a utopian framework to it. Am I wrong? I mean, what do you think about my accusation that this book is a utopian project? You can say
it's not a utopian. No, I think it has, and I think it has in as much as it starts from a very hopeful or utopian point of departure, which is Yusuf's essay. She is in that essay. I don't know if in her work, but in that essay in particular, she's proposing an alternative, or at least the possibility of alternatives. No, like you said, as Jameson said, the possibility, utopia or alternatives, is the flame or is the fire that keeps, in this case, a writing or a certain community sense of community through writing or through gestures alive. No, and I think that pervades through all the readings, and it's really interesting because some of the texts we read and thought for the book, but there are other texts that we commissioned to younger authors mostly, Verónica Gerber or Horacio Warpola, and these Mexican writers, young writers, read Yusuf's book, and it's really curious that this idea of hopefulness, at least, or a sense that writing, maybe the world has no future, but writing has a future, or writing is a path to a certain future, is in a way present here. And I think that, to me at least, is really interesting to see that in people writing today, that is a feeling, or that is a reading that was not guided, and given a text, they took that same idea, or they finally expressed something like that, no, in common.
So you're also a writer.
Yeah.
So what is nobody ever wants to admit it. It's an embarrassing thing to be, isn't it?
No, because I really write very little.
But you.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
I've written, yes.
So this. I mean, but editing is also creative. I mean, I guess I want to know about these two processes and their relationship to the other, because like I could say, like, reading this book, that this book is a work of art created through the editorial process, right? And you can see the same kind of formal thinking that you think when a poet arranges words, right? When a novelist tells a story. So you have this like editorial art form, which I think is the sort of general thinking behind the whole project. So if you want to talk about this intersection here between the editorial process and the other sort of creative and critical processes.
Well, and that's really interesting because that, honestly, that's not just me, that's Mauricio and Jacobo. They too, Gris Tormenta has a really artistic, in a sense, outlook towards editing. They take editing they look at editing as not just pushing blogs in InDesign, or they don't think of editing as just composing a catalog of sellable titles. They are really strict about the things they publish, and they are really meticulous about the way they construct the series, or the anthologies, or the other series. No? So I think this is a book that could not have existed in any other publishing house, at least here in Mexico, because it's a book that requires a little bit of that artistic spirit when thinking about editing. No? And I think the creative, artistic ideas that are really, I don't know how to say it, like ponderous, but not in a bad sense, like really deep or really well thought through. So they're not just let's make something that's nice or that's pleasing or that's aesthetically that we like. I think they also have very deeply thought ideas about what literature can be or should be, or what books can be or should be. And in a sense, they could not edit in any other way but really artistically or methodically. When I talk about them or Gris Tormenta with other people when they're not present, I always say I say this, and I also say they are like editors from another century and from another country, you know, for the Mexican literary scene, because they take time when editing, and we come back to the idea of time here, because editing takes time. Editing is reading upon reading upon reading. If reading a book takes, I don't know, 500 pages takes a couple of weeks to savor it, to enjoy it, editing a book takes a lot of time. And one thing that publishing houses and one thing that markets say is we're running out of time, everything needs to happen today. No? So the fact that they have this idea of time, I think that's key to creating books that are works of art in the editing process.
Well, the other thing it does, I mean, I like books that are sort of formed out of real desire for their existence. So when I encounter books that are just put there, like, you're like, why does this book exist? Like, why is there like the 50th baked potato cookbook, right? Or the like Lieutenant Governor of Idaho. Why is his biography on the shelf? And and like the books that I love are the ones, I mean, I'm such a book nerd. Like, where somebody took the type of the letterpress, right, with their fingers, like their cold fingers in the garret, and they line the type up. And they wanted it, that they raised the money with their friends. They, when in the United States, maybe people do here, you sell plasma so you can get $30. They sold all their blood, right? Because they wanted the book to exist. And when I come across those books are the most important things in the world to me, because you can feel it. And like for myself, I never wanted to publish a book that wasn't like completely desired by the editor. I mean, I have very strong, I get very strongly attached to when the right people publish my work. Like, I'm just in it for life, right? I just like, this is a friendship. This is like an artistic relationship that'll last forever. And because I don't want to make something that's empty or superficial or just something that maybe it will be cast off, but I don't want it to be cast off. I want it to be loved like I love things I love, right? And so that time is in fact the ingredient and the thing that the marketplace abhors, like the trend cycle, which cannot be predicted years in advance, and they want books that will match like whatever is going to be like the TikTok trend topic. And so this is why this kind of work is so important. Also, I just keep thinking, because there's these young people out there, you can start presses. Like you can start them now. Like you can make these books, you know, even if you have to go, get a job in an office where you can make some photocopies and staple it together. This is how it's always been done, and this is what you will need to do, and you don't ever have to wait for someone to give you permission to do it.
They were telling me that we have 5 minutes, so I don't know if we should open to questions, and if anyone has questions, or we can keep talking.
I mean, there's other questions? Or?
No. No.
Oh, here's one.
Ok, bueno, hola Pablo. Me gustaría saber si hay algún punto en común en los ensayos, y la otra es ¿por qué sigue fascinando hablar sobre el acto de escritura en nuestros tiempos? Son dos preguntas.
Well, I'm going to answer in English so that the point, the theme in common in all the essays would be first and foremost writing, or the act of writing, seen through multiple worldviews, from the most from the historical point of view, and from poetic point of views, and from material point of views. I mean, the act of writing as a complex act that involves a lot of people and involves a lot of other processes. I think that is the point that or the theme that runs through the essays, no? But not only that, also other ideas. We were talking about time. Time is a topic that runs through. Another idea that runs through, that in a certain sense, is the idea of community, or the idea of being together, be it being together as a writer looking for a reader, or being together as a writer talking about memories, or being together as the impossibility of living together in this world. Those are all ideas that are present in the essays, and they are seen in different ways and talked about in different ways throughout. And the other question, why is it so fascinating to still talk about the act of writing? I think I have one idea, but I would like to ask Anne to contribute. My idea is, I think writing is such a solitary endeavor. Writing is such a personal act that there are very few spaces where actual dialogue, or actual, where we can talk about the act of writing. No? And I think even if there's no dialogue, like live dialogue like we're doing right now, the idea of reading about the act of writing is, in a way, the idea of participating in a different kind of conversation with a person who does the same thing that one does, or one wishes to do, or one is fascinated by.
I mean, also, the writing is exceptionally lonely and actually sort of counter-instinctual. That is, everybody here who's a writer knows that you sit down to write, and you're like, I could be watching Netflix, right? Or I could be drinking a beer, or I could be flirting, or I could be doing my dishes, right? And instead I'm going to do this thing which may amount to nothing at all. So it has this kind of beautiful futility about it, for I think a lot of us, loneliness about it, and always to me, like heroism about it. That is, the people who continue to do it against the odds, the people who do it and they don't get rich from it, they don't get famous from it, but they still keep writing and making beautiful things for the world. It's important for us to talk about that because everything else in the world takes up all the noise and all the conversation. And so we do have this, like, you know, quiet territory of literature that we can still discuss.
¿Alguna otra pregunta que tenga? Hi, nice to meet you. Is some kind of hope in a dystopic way that maybe all the text will be in training for artificial intelligence, and that they will be in that place, but maybe not reading in the order or in the way that they write it, hope, but they will be there in that space or cloud or future. I don't know what to think about.
Yeah, I mean, or it's the graveyard of literature, right? I guess the charming is near the graveyard. I mean, there's an app that uses my work to train it. And they did try to hire me. And when it got to the point in which I had to, you know, and I'm going to talk to them, but I mean, that app is a popular one, and you know, and I understand that my work was used as a style guide, and I didn't get anything back from it, I guess, except for maybe the satisfaction. People everywhere are staring into the abyss of their screen and seeing like poor computer imitations of my style, right? So what do we do with that? Like, it's hard to see that, like the sort of dystopic hope of AI, because we're in this transitional moment. As I said, sometimes we can't recognize the future for what it is, and so maybe my unpleasant reaction, or my weird reaction to that is nothing. I don't know, what do you think?
I don't know, it's really puzzling, and it's just as you say, like a transitionary phase. It's all so new, it's all so unsettled, you know? And I think there's a lot of, I don't know, like a lot of hair pulling also, that doesn't help a lot.
And I will say too that probably, I think we have to get out of here, but that the AI probably poses, if we're going to really worry, the threat is not to the literary imagination as much as it is when it's used for purposes of war and policing. That is, there's like a real immediate threat to human life that AI poses. I think we're probably pretty good on like the literary imagination for in a couple more decades, maybe. All right, thank you.
Pues le queremos agradecer a Pablo y a por estar aquí presentes, igual a todos que pudieron asistir a la conferencia, y pues nada, esperamos que sigan disfrutando de la Feria del Libro, y pues muchas gracias por haber venido.